Welcome to the BC CSA's Multi-Employer Workplace Roles and Responsibilities webinar, part 2. My name is Tanya Steele, and I will be your host for this session. In the last webinar, we discussed health and safety requirements related to multi-employer workplaces in BC's construction industry. We focused on the roles and responsibilities of owners, prime contractors, and employers. Some of the topics that we talked about in our last webinar was who is the prime contractor and the owner, legislated responsibilities, including the qualified coordinator, planning and coordinating of multi-employer workplaces, and maintaining your health and safety system. And at the end of that last webinar, there were many questions from lots of you, and you all requested to have a part 2 continuation of that. And so if you missed part 1, you can go to the BCCSA website and listen to it because it is there for you. The BCCSA staff will put the link into the chat box for you. So if you want to grab that link and use it a little bit later or later today or on the weekend, please feel free to do that. So today, as I said, is part 2. We are digging deeper into some of the conversation that we had last time. We're going to be talking about the WCB officer, their risk-based approach, including some of the new COVID updates we're going to talk about today. Due diligence, what does reasonable person, like what do they do? What does that mean? Functions of a prime contractor, empowering the qualified coordinator, and then of course at the end we will have the how's this, Andrew? We'll have the Ask the Manager of WCB Prevention Field Services Q&A. So we're going to have that open for you guys. If you have come with a question that you were hoping we would answer, please go ahead right now and put it in the Q&A at this time. You'll notice that you'll have an option for Q&A and chat. We will be accepting questions in Q&A. So if you do have one, please go ahead and put it in now. If you notice a question that is already in the Q&A, you can actually like that question to say, yeah, I really like that. That's a great idea. And what that does is it helps prioritize the questions for us and sort of move up in order. So we know that there's more than 1 or 2 of you that would like to know the answer. We also only have an hour with you, so we might not get to all of the questions, but we will certainly try. If we do not answer your question right away, it might mean that our guest, Andrew, will be answering it later in the presentation. So please note that we're unable to answer what if questions. Okay, so, but if you have general questions related to the presentation, please go ahead and send it to us in Q&A. So the Q&A is for us panelists. We see the questions for you. The chat is open for conversation between you and the other attendees, as well as being monitored by our BCCSA staff. So if you're going to put something in chat, please know that's sort of the conversation, but you want to click on all panelists and attendees in chat so that everybody can see your conversation and your chat back and forth. So make sure that you click on that in the chat. Chat will be monitored by the BCCSA staff. So if you accidentally put a question in chat, or if you're like, oh, BCCSA says that's a great question, they'll encourage you to put it into the Q&A so that we can address it for you. So first thing I want to do is, because I recognize so many of you on the line, that's fantastic. I want to welcome you, but I want to practice chat. So let's practice the chat. We would love to know what city that you are currently in. So go ahead and type in chat for us. Let us know where you're calling us in from. We got some people from the island, Castlegar, wow, Cranbrook, Surrey, yeah, I'm a Surrey too. I'm in Cloverdale, Port Coquitlam, Nelson, Burnaby, Kelowna, beautiful, Kelowna, nice, yes, Nanaimo, Langley, Vancouver, Chilliwack, Nanaimo. Oh, we got lots of people from the island. Euclid, nice. Powell River, Fraser Health Region. That's awesome. We're staying in our health regions, right? Kelowna, Abbotsford, Surrey. Well, it's excellent. Well, thank you so very much for letting us know where you're calling in from, or listening in from, I guess is more accurate. I do have a couple of fun questions for you. We have some dates that are coming up here in April. In chat, what is April the 28th? What are we doing on April the 28th? Just put that in chat. Who knows? Who remembers? Yeah, the day of mourning. Yeah, that's right. And we want to remember and all of those workers that we just need to, remember them for unfortunately losing their life in the workplace, which is why we're here today, is to try to prevent that from happening again. So remember April the 28th. And then after April the 28th, it's the very first week of May. Does anybody know what happens every year the first week of May? I'll be really impressed if we have some people in the room. NAOSH, yeah, that's right. That's excellent. The North American Occupational Health and Safety Week. So that's great. That's coming up in May, and hopefully you or your organization is planning something, whether it's virtually or whatever it is, just to really promote safety in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico are all participating. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for participating in chat. We have a lot of information that we want to get to you. So without further delay, let me introduce to you our panelist, our guest panelist that is with me, Mr. Andrew Kidd. Welcome back, Andrew.
Morning, Tanya. Morning, everyone.
And I don't know if you already know Andrew, but if you don't, Andrew has been with WorkSafeBC for almost 14 years in various positions. And now he is currently the manager of prevention and field services. And once again, has been very generous with his time to be here with us today. But before I do hand it over to Andrew, I got a polling question that I'm going to ask. We're going to put up and ask all the guests here, because I know you're going to talk about the WCB and the mandate. So you should have a question in front of you. So go ahead and answer that. And then we'll give you about 30 seconds here to do that. So what is WorkSafeBC's prevention mandate? Select sort of the best answer. I think you might be able to select more than one. So go ahead and do that. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer that, and then we're going to put up the results for you. All right, so 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2. You can select multiple answers. Thank you, BCCSA in chat. I appreciate that. You can click on more than one answer. That's awesome, because I think there's a couple of them there now that I'm looking at it. All right, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're going to close down that poll, and let's show that results if we can. All right, so look at this, Andrew. What do you think?
That's pretty good. Surprising, actually.
Oh, that's great. Are these are like way smarter people than we anticipated, or what? Like they're freaking brilliant?
They're on the ball for sure.
That's awesome. Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for participating in that. So Andrew, why don't you tell us about this WCB and mandate? Now you're going to talk a little bit about the officers as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Morning, everybody, and thanks for having me back. Just a point of clarification before we go on. I'm a manager of prevention field services. I'm not actually the manager, as much as I'd like to be. There are many managers for different regions around the province, but I did serve a time as the senior manager for prevention quality and got quite involved in the education and training of officers regarding the kind of stuff that we're talking about this morning.
Andrew, know this, to us, you are the manager.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So I thought I'd give you a brief insight into, what our mandate is and how we look at things, our principles of enforcement. So I work in field services as a manager. I am the manager of Construction Zone 1, and we've split the Lower Mainland into 4 construction zones. It used to be Construction East and West. Now we've got 4. Each of those zones has roughly 22, 23 full-time positions of officers that specialize in construction. Now, the rest of the province, they have construction officers that are embedded into their general industry inspectional thing. It's only the Lower Mainland that's specialized for construction. My region goes all the way Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Corridor, is a shared region with another zone, but really I do West Vancouver, Vancouver, and Richmond. The lower mainland stretches halfway up the Coquihalla and out to Boston Bar there. I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are, what we do, how we do it. I believe you'll benefit from what to expect from an officer when you visit your workplace, how we can use this as a resource and how you can incorporate some of our strategies into your own. Strategies that we certainly hope will help you and your colleagues stay safe in the workplace. WorkSafeBC officers come from a variety of backgrounds, from different industries, different positions within companies, different geographical areas. We find our strength in that diversity. We share our knowledge and experience. We have experience in health and safety, even if we're not completely familiar with your industry. And our experience, both individual and collectively, has taught us that we don't have all the answers. What we do practice, however, is finding out the answers. We ask a lot of questions each day, and we rely on each other. We have many, many meetings and collaborations and talking between the officers. We have officers experienced in underground workings and crane, et cetera, and we share that knowledge and we share that experience. And kind of our mantra is there's always another officer, another subject matter expert at the end of the phone, so that we can dig into the real areas and provide you with some expert advice. In your work, you can think about the different areas where hazards need to be addressed. It's not likely reasonable to expect that one person has the knowledge and experience to pull off a great health and safety program. But a culture of asking questions, listening for answers, inclusion and collaboration is really what we're looking for, is expanding and getting input from all areas, so we can all work together for a healthy and safe workplace. My favorite definition of success has always been, I think it's a Dr. Dwyer thing, but it's success is a measurable progression towards a worthy goal. Our goals at WorkSafeBC are certainly worthy, so it should be very easy to be successful. We have the goal of making sure that everyone goes home in as good a condition or better than when they came to work. So what do we do? In prevention, we have a mandate. Just trying to control two things at the same time here. So our mandate is to assist employers and workers to reduce risk and to keep workplaces healthy and safe through education, consultation, and enforcement. And good to see your poll there, that was very much reflected with what your answers were. To me, it's one of the finest things that we've written, and it incorporates quite a few different concepts within there. First of all, it's not our job to reduce risk at the WorkSafe. It's not the job of the officer to reduce the risk. It's sometimes a happy outcome of what we do, but our job is to help you and to engage you to change the risk in the WorkSafe, really to change how you think about health and safety. So that's what we're there to do. We're hopefully change agents, and that's what we strive for. And compliance is just the start. We want sustainable compliance, that concept of keeping workplaces healthy and safe. We want sustainable compliance. We want to make a difference when we leave the work site. More than sustainable compliance, we want innovation in health and safety, and through BCSA and different agencies like that, PTAC, people are getting together to take their industry further, and that's really what we're looking for, is to promote that and to be involved in that and to try and move forward. Because after the inspection, we leave. We're going to stick around. We're going to see certain things, but really we leave, and our ultimate goal is to change the way that you think about things. In that mandate, we talk about education and consultation, and that should be part of every enforcement action that an officer takes. In fact, it's part of our enforcement model. What's the point of enforcement if there's no learnings, no change in behavior? And for those of you tasked with health and safety inspections at your workplaces, you can think about how you can make education and consultation a part of your enforcement actions within that. It's a really important concept that people understand what it is that they need to change, and that they're clear on what needs to be done. Enforcement, you know, and don't shy away from talking to enforcement. It's the underpinning of what we do. It really allows our voice to be heard. We have the advantage of being the regulator, and that gives us, our voice, the ability to be heard when other voices that can be just as well intentioned sometimes get lost in the crowd there. Enforcement is not a tool, it's a tool to motivate, it's not a tool to punish. Most of our things are set up to the point of view of motivation of the employer. How do we get you into a place where compliance is being achieved and that you're ensuring that there's a healthy and safe place for workers to work at your workplace? Enforcement needs to come with some principles, and we have principles of enforcement, and they are, and I'll go through a few of them just quickly. Proportionality, transparency, effectiveness, and consistency with flexibility. I'll start with proportionality. Our reactions to circumstances must make sense. We're risk-based in our enforcement. High-risk violations or conditions must be dealt with immediately, and change must be effective and sustainable. Non-high-risk violations are still, of course, important, but we have a little bit more breathing room to deal with those. And violations where there's an absence of risk, maybe it's some paperwork shuffle, they take a lesser level of importance. And this is how it should be. We must be reasonable to be credible. You will need to be reasonable and credible to affect change within your organization as well. And taking a risk-based approach to that, and taking the time to identify all hazards in your workplace, assessing the risk involved with those hazards, and controlling those risks really is what makes you credible. And you know, credible people do credible things, and this is the whole basis of reasonableness. What do we mean by risk? Well, what do we mean by high risk? We have in our regulations some designated high-risk violations, and these are like, you know, exposed to a fall without a fall protection system over 10 feet, entry into an excavation without adequate sloping shoring, confined space, exposure to asbestos, etc. These often result in serious or fatal injuries, and there's little opportunity to minimize those injuries. Other violations, we make the determination of high risk based on the likelihood of an incident or exposure occurring and the likely seriousness of the injury that could result in the incident or exposure. In your work, you'll see opportunities to change how health and safety is embraced by making it reasonable, by making it make sense, and by making it proportional to the risk. We often get this feedback that, you know, health and safety is just a bunch of rules on a clipboard. If we can make the effort to identify what the risks are and control them in a reasonable and proportional way, then we get the buy-in, or we start to get the buy-in from the workers on the work site, which is really your frontline defense on all things health and safety, is get the buy-in from the workers, and they will do that work for you. COVID-19, that's given us all an opportunity to look at this in a different way. It really is the risk-based approach from a slightly different perspective. We've not often in the past considered the hazards that our workplace could be the people that are that we work with, that they unknowingly bring with them the risk of disease. Fundamentally, though, this is no different than all the other hazards that are present. We've identified this virus as a hazard. We've assessed the risk of transmission at our workplaces, and we've put controls in place to control the risk. We'll come out of this pandemic with a stronger understanding of what must be done to effectively control all risks at the workplace. Really, it's you know, across the board, all workplaces have all had to look at this in this way, you know, collectively, all together. And I think that that'll make a huge difference in health and safety and how we approach things. Transparency. Justice must not only be done, but it must be seen to be done. And this is what we instill in the officers as well. We need to be forthcoming in what we do, letting employers and workers know what we're there to do, how we will conduct ourselves, what actions we will take, and what outcomes to be expected. Really letting us know who we are, what we're there to do. Minds and our attitudes are changed by credible people doing credible things. And from your own perspective, can you imagine how much more you can achieve if your supervisors, if your managers, etc., are acting in a more transparent way with their workers and really getting that buy-in? It's a philosophy to look forward to. It's a principle. Effectiveness when it comes to enforcement. There was a report called by McAtee report, and he said that effectiveness is the least onerous enforcement tool to achieve sustainable compliance. So building on proportionality, we want to measure progression towards the worthy goal. We strategize, we collaborate, we think of what the greatest risks are and how we can address them. How we approach the situation will be effective in training or in attaining our goal. And I'd ask you, what are your strategies to attain health and safety goals, and how do you plan to act on them? And that concept of not hitting something with a hammer when it needs a slight, moving forward. And we talk a lot to officers about that. How do we build that momentum? How do we get your motivation, and how do we move you forward? Of course, when we go back time and time again and things haven't changed, we have the bigger hammer available to us to really motivate the employer that isn't complying. We look for consistency with flexibility. Similar circumstances must result in similar actions. We need to be seen as fair and steady in our actions. Our actions must be aligned with our goal and relentless until they're achieved. Of course, we always need to remain flexible, and one size doesn't fit all. Flexibility has its place, and this also ties into this sense of reasonableness. So think about how you could achieve consistency within your organization and what guiding principles you will employ when you need flexible areas. And I'll get off the subject of what we do and how we approach it now, but these are very similar concepts that I think that the way we look at health and safety and the attitudes that we come to a work site with, these are some things that if incorporated in your health and safety program can really make a difference, I believe so. We're going to move on now to the functions of a prime contractor in due diligence and what could a reasonable person do. And I think we're handing that back to Tanya before we go any further.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much, Andrew. And we really, even as a BCCSA RSAs, we get some really great feedback about the WorkSafe officers really trying to educate and be flexible. But I love that you said relentless, because we really want to make people safe, and we need people to, to get it and to motivate them towards that. So that's awesome. So yes, we do. Before you move on to the prime contractor, the functions of a prime contractor and a little bit of the due diligence, we have a poll for everybody, just because we are curious in the room. Is your company a prime contractor? Yes or no, or maybe you don't know if you're a prime contractor, and hopefully we can answer that question for you. So again, just click on one of those. We'll give you about 6 or 7 more seconds to participate in that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How about that? So we'll close that down, and we're going to share the results for you. All right. So look at this, Andrew. We have about 82% of the people who are online with us today are a prime contractor. There's a couple of people that are like, actually, I'm not positive. And then we have a few people like, no, definitely not the prime contractor. So thank you all for participating in that. I really do appreciate that. So Andrew, tell us, what are some of the functions for the prime contractor, because we have everybody's here. They're like, tell us what it is that we need to do, and what are some of our due diligence?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit last time about the responsibilities under the Act and some of the parts in the regulation in Part 20 that were specific to prime contractors in construction. And we're going to talk a little bit about due diligence and how that fits in with what those responsibilities are. So good to know that most of you are primes. So due diligence always comes down to due diligence. Due diligence is the defense of a penalty or a general duty order. However, it's more than that. I believe it can be the principle that keeps workers healthy and safe and be a basis for an effective health and safety program. As a defense, it means two things, really. It means that the employer took all reasonable steps to avoid a particular event or a violation, and that the employer believed in a mistaken set of facts, which, if true, would render the act or omission innocent. So they believed something, and they truly believed it, and they were acting under that information. But there's some concepts in there. Then the concepts behind reasonable steps to avoid, or another way of saying that is doing everything a reasonable person would do, really forms the basis of what we can do to effectively keep our workplaces healthy and safe. What's reasonable depends on the situation. However, there is some commonality there. And we have some indicators of due diligence and what that looks at. So indicators of due diligence can be that the hazards have been identified and the risks assessed. We talked about a risk-based approach, and this is fundamental to what a reasonable person would do. What is on our worksite that can hurt us, right? Where are they? What is the nature of those? And what is the risks associated with that? That is fundamental, and that's a reasonable thing to do, is to take a look at a workplace and say, hey, what can hurt us here? We also realize that all reasonable steps to establish due diligence may be greater when the risk is higher. So what you need to do in an office as compared to what you need to do when you're doing rock scaling or you're doing work on a high-rise tower can be quite different. And this is where the sliding scale and the gray of due diligence really, you need to embrace it in a conceptual manner. What is reasonable to do to protect people? And this is where we have a great difficulty in saying this is due diligence and this is not due diligence. You really need to take a look at it in a reasonable manner and figure out what makes sense and what people would do in order to ensure the health and safety of the workers. So certainly they're going to identify those hazards, and certainly they're going to assess the risks associated with those hazards. Then the next part about that is a reasonable person is going to control those risks, right? So it's not a complex thing. It's okay, where are the hazards? What is the risk to workers, and how do we control them? And then taking steps to control those hazards. It's more than the health and safety program. It's more than those procedures are written. They're actually taking these real life steps and making sure that those are controlled and monitoring to ensure that they remain controlled. Reasonable people provide workers with sufficient information to work safely. How is that getting down to the frontline worker? How is the newer young worker to know what they need to do? A reasonable person is going to make sure they have a system in place to make sure that happens, that information is given out there, that they understand that everyone on the work site has an idea of what they need to do and how they need to work safely. You, of course, need an accident investigation and a reporting system in place so that if there is any incidents, you can learn from those mistakes and incorporate that, make the changes and move that. Reasonable people make adjustments when things go wrong. They look into it, they determine what's happened, and they make changes to avoid it happening again. We do that with our kids all the time, right? And I certainly don't want to liken workers to children in that concept, but I certainly will liken them to workers being children in the fact that they are that important to us, or they should be that important to us, that we're looking after them and we're taking those reasonable steps. We don't have to be perfect, but reasonable people identify their mistakes and make the changes. You need to provide those workers with adequate training and instruction and supervision to understand and carry out in according to the policies and procedures. So you're training them, you're instructing them, you're providing qualified supervisors that have also been instructed and trained on how to supervise you for the purpose of health and safety. And they're out there as your frontline people, making sure that everyone stays informed and stays working within the region. That's what a reasonable person would do. The employer also needs to demonstrate that they have adequate monitoring and supervision of the workplace to ensure conditions are safe and that the workers follow those policies and procedures. And I can't stress that one enough. It's your superintendents on site, it's your supervisors, it's your lead hands. We kind of know anecdotally from the officers and talking that most of the supervisors we run into don't know that they're supervisors for the purpose of health and safety. They're a good framer, they become a lead hand. They're a good lead hand, they supervise a couple of crews, but they have not yet been taken off to the side and gone, hey, part of your job is to ensure the health and safety. That is a very important function of what you do, and we want you to make sure that our workers are safe while you're out there doing that. So providing them with that training and education, and also monitoring of them. You need a system to monitor your supervisors. So it all kind of rolls uphill. What are your systems there? What are your reasonable actions in order to make sure that these things are happening on the work site? So as a prime contractor, due diligence means that you've taken all reasonable steps to ensure that the activities of employers at your workplace are coordinated. That comes out of the Act. And that you have ensured that the activities at your workplace are in compliance with the Act and regulation. So let's take a look at that in the context of COVID-19. And it actually, like I mentioned before, this almost simplifies it, and it really has this this effect that we can look at our whole system in a different way. So as a prime contractor, you need to make sure that your employees and your workers are working in compliance with the Act and regulation. Every employer is required to have an effective COVID safety plan. So how are you determining it's compliant? Well, how do you know that? You need to look at it. You need to read it. You need to take a look at it. How do you know that it addresses all the areas that need to be addressed? They can't simply work under your plan, and that's something that's often asked, because your plan doesn't address how the workers get to work. It doesn't address how they perform their work in their yard, or when they pick up supplies or materials, or even how they perform their work at other workplaces. It's reasonable that you take steps to know the content of the plan and whether or not it's effective and compliant. That is a function of the prime contractor, and a reasonable person would grab that plan, have a read, and see what it says, and see if it's compliant. It's reasonable to take steps to know that the content of their plan and whether or not it's effective and compliant. Reasonable people take steps to know that potential hazards brought to their workplace are controlled. And you know, we'll talk a little bit about how that looks to other stuff in a little minute, but the other part of that, how does that plan fit in with your plan? How do you make sure that it's coordinated with your plan and the plans of all the other employers on the work site? Reasonable people take steps to make sure things fit together. Reasonable people want to know what the employers are, that the employers performing work activities of their work sites are serious about health and safety, and that they have also been duly diligent in their endeavors. That's all part of what reasonable people do. What are you bringing to my work site, and how are you going to behave when you're there? You need to know that. Reasonable people need to know that. And this is not different from what was always the expectation. Perhaps we're looking at it a little bit clearer lens, but the framer bringing onto your site a 20-year-old boom lift or a 20-year-old all-terrain forklift, do they adequately maintain and inspect that equipment? Is it safe to bring to your work site? Are their operators trained? Are they trained adequately? Have they been coordinated with respect to working around others? Reasonable people know these things. Reasonable people take steps to know these things. and they don't simply hope for compliance. And this is what we really mean about due diligence. It's not just a defense. It really is a way to look at health and safety. Think to yourself, as a reasonable person, if I wanted to ensure the health and safety of my workers there, what steps do I need to take? Most certainly, you need to know that what's coming to your work site and the people that are coming to work at your workplace are going to work in a safe manner, and they're using equipment that's in good condition, and that they're not creating hazards that you haven't identified and put controls in place to deal with. So I think that was that section there. If we're good.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome. Thanks, Andrew. And don't forget, if you guys have questions, we can put them into the Q&A, and we're going to address them either at the very end or throughout if it does relate to what we're talking about at the moment. But Andrew's talking about just reasonable person and talking about sort of these coordinating activities. And so we do have a poll for you because he's about to talk about empowering the qualified coordinator. And so our question to you is to let us know, do you have health and safety responsibilities at your workplace? Okay, so what do you think about that? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Or actually, I'm unsure if I have them or not. All right, so we'll give you 5 more seconds. And while we're getting that poll ready, Andrew, there's a quick question that's maybe come up in chat here. How deep do you dig in an operator's training to determine it's compliant from a reasonable point? So how far down do we go? How deep do we dig to get this compliance?
Well, you take a reasonable approach to that, and of course it's going to be different to you've got a huge piece of equipment coming onto your work site. Is you're probably going to dig in a little bit deeper than if somebody's simply bringing a powered wheelbarrow to your site. I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but reasonable people understand that the hazards and what are the hazards associated with bringing that piece of equipment there, and what do you need to know to be comfortable that that employer is in compliance with that. And that can change. It can change as well from your relationship with that employer. And I think I mentioned last time, like if it's a brand new contractor to you and they're coming along, I'd be digging pretty deep. I'd want to know, what do you guys do to train your workers? I mean, you don't have to do an audit of what they're doing, but what do you guys do to train your workers? How often do you do refresher training? How do you supervise your operators to make sure that they're operating it the way that you want to? These are the things that what I would want to know with a new contractor coming up on the work site, because I don't know what they're bringing. So I need to dig fairly deep till I'm comfortable that they're going to come into the work site and they're going to fit in with our operation, and they're not going to cause any harm or any further risk or create any more hazards at the workplace.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew.
But so I'm not quite finished there.
Oh, okay.
If you start to get a right relationship with that framer, you've been working with them for 20 years. That can start to get a little bit of a simpler process. It's nudge once in a while. You're still doing this, you're still doing that. But if their crew changes or something significantly changes, you want to ramp that back up again. So it's looking at it in a real context, and that context needs to be, hey, what are you bringing to my work site, and how am I going to be comfortable that you're going to act the way we need you to act when you're there?
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. That's a great answer. Really adds some clarity to that. So we did give you a poll. And so we're now going to show you the results of that poll. So do you have health and safety responsibilities at your workplace? Well, pretty much all of you, 98% of you said, yeah, I have some sort of health and safety responsibilities. And maybe 1 or 2 of you are like, well, actually, I'm not too sure how deep are my responsibilities and what does that look like? So Andrew, so tell us, what is this empowering the qualified coordinator? Like, what do you mean by that? And how do I empower these coordinators?
Yeah, under certain conditions, the prime contractor needs to appoint a qualified coordinator. And I think it's, off the top of my head, it's 5 or more workers for 2 more employers where they could create a hazard to each other. So really, it's meant to address the more complex workplaces where there is more activity that can affect other workers of other employers. That you have somebody that's specific in there and qualified to do so in order to make sure that that coordination happens. The smaller, less sophisticated sites, we don't need that. It's kind of the same concept of, you need a health and safety program, a formal one at a certain area, and less than that, a less formal one. It's to address the differences in the type of work that we do. Most of the times where there's a prime contractor, most of the stuff you're going to deal with, you're going to need somebody to do that. And we often see the person kicking around there with a clipboard, or the first aid person. They've been given a clipboard and out there to fill in their checklists. What's often missing is the empowering of that qualified coordinator. Qualified means, and the definition in the regulations and act is that they're knowledgeable of the work, the hazards involved, and the means to control the hazards. And they get that way by reason of education, training, experience, and a combination thereof. And there's a couple of things within that I want to point out. The means to control the hazards doesn't exist if you don't employ them to do their work, empower them, to do their work. You need to stand behind them and support them. And you must also consider the skill required to get people to do things that they're perhaps unwilling to do. These are skills that are just as important as their knowledge of health and safety. Their work is challenging. Think about what training and information you could provide them that they can effectively do the work that they need them to do, you need them to do. They're often your eyes and ears. They're taking the pulse of the workplace. You need them to have the tools to be successful. So that's the support from the lead hands, the support from the superintendent, the support for the employer, not just support in standing behind them and making sure that when they want to make changes at the worksite based on what they're seeing and what they're identifying, that you stand behind them and make those changes or authorize those changes. But also that they're getting the kind of training they need. And like I mentioned before, even the fact that, hey, this is your responsibility. But that training and that information and some of the softer skills are important as well. They're fighting that battle. Health and safety is a battle. It's you're out there trying to do things. You're often competing against deadlines and budgets and all those types of things. And somewhere in that qualified coordinator needs to be empowered to make the changes that need to happen, to say, stop, we got to do this first. We got to make those changes. So take that position as a very important and a very critical part of your health and safety program. And again, that's what due diligence is. That's what a reasonable person would do. You would employ somebody to do a job for you, and you'd provide them all the tools and all the training and all the support that they need in order to do that job successfully. And all too often we see those, and some of them very, very educated and they have lots of training. If they don't have the support from the employer, from the prime contractor, their job is an uphill battle. So embrace them for what they do. They're a very important function, and provide them those things.
I'll kind of throw something in here, Andrew, for you, or kind of make a comment, because we find this even when we're teaching our NCSOs, and we're trying to be prepared that they're going to be maybe those coordinators, those qualified coordinators. And a lot of time, I think, as you're saying, is that they have these responsibilities that they need to do, but they don't have the authority to do some stuff. And we teach them that. We say, hey, listen, when you come out of this course, you can't just start shutting down sites and just doing all these these, cop things, as we say, but you really need to have a conversation with your employer and find out, what authority and that you have or that they're giving you to move forward with the safety on the site. So what would you say then to an employer who has this NCSO, let's say hypothetically has this NCSO person, or what should the NCSO ask the employer to say? How much authority should I have? Like what conversation should go between the two of them?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, very similar in how we led into this conversation today. We all have officers that go out and do that with huge authority. And you need to put a mandate behind that, and you need to put principles behind that, and you need to continually monitor and supervise them and look into their actions and give them goals and deadlines and training and all those types of things. So the same thing with a site CSO, or the safety person or the qualified coordinator on site. A lot of power that you could potentially be giving them. So you need to put some parameters around that. You need to lend that support. You need to tell them what your mandate for them is. What are you asking them to do? Be very clear, be very precise about their goals and their functions, and put parameters around them, like, principles of transparency, effectiveness, those types of things. And there may be others from your point of view, but it's a function that what a reasonable person would do, would think about the function that you're asking them to do and make sure that all these things are in place for them to do that effectively. Because they're going to get pushback, they're going to get ignored, they're going to be running up against deadlines and stuff like that. You got to give them the tools to deal with that, because ultimately they're the ones that you're putting out there to make sure that your responsibilities are adequately taken care of. And that's huge. And to be honest with you, it'd be very hard to demonstrate due diligence if you didn't do those things, because these are reasonable actions. You don't just hire somebody and say, hey, you're the framer, go do that, do it whatever way you want, and don't ask for anything, right? You wouldn't conduct yourself that way. And the other thing that I'd point out, these things are not a departure for how you build your buildings, how you build your structures, how you do your work. You're doing coordination. We're just asking you to coordinate also health and safety. You're scheduling, you're taking a look at the quality of the work that your contractors are doing. You're digging into these areas. You're finding out how good they are at their job. Are they reasonable price? Can they meet deadlines and all those things? We're just asking you to do the same thing about health and safety. You're hiring people to do a work. You're making sure that they're qualified with their resumes, etc. And you're giving them instruction. You're giving them supervision. We're just asking you to do the same thing about health and safety. So you're doing it anyway. It's just about incorporating that kind of stuff with it. And again, this sense of being able to change things when people don't do that. If your painter painted the wall blue when you've asked them to paint it red, you would change it very quickly. You wouldn't have any qualms about it. You'd meet it head on. You'd deal with it directly, and you'd get those things changed. We want you to do exactly the same thing, because reasonable people would do that and take those actions. When you're asking people to come to your workplace and work safely, if they're not working safely, you need to deal with that with the same gusto that you deal with the wrong paint color.
I love that. Gusto. That's right. That's awesome. Now, I do have a question, Andrew, in a chat for you. You may have pretty much addressed it, but I think it is worth saying it again. As a prime contractor, what is duly required in relation to ensuring subcontractors are informed of your policies and procedures?
Well, they certainly need to be fully informed if you want them to work under that. If that's the situation where they're coming in and you have safe work procedures that they need to be aware of in order to incorporate their work into yours. And that's not only part of the ensuring that they're in compliance when they come in there, because they need to follow that direction, but also in how their work activities are coordinated. So it may be maybe nothing, maybe it doesn't affect something. Again, when you look at the caveat we talked about, 5 or more workers working for 2 more employers, where they can have an effect on each other. You're going to make that reasonable determination. Are they coming into a work site? What do they need to know? Example lately of a contractor that comes into a BC Hydro switching station. If they're in there and they're renovating the lunchroom, there may be not a lot of procedures that they need to know about how to shut down the switching station. They're not involved in that and they're kept away. But if there's a rub point, if there are places where it could affect each other, you need to make sure that they're informed and that they know enough, certainly, to not only protect their workers, but to protect all the workers at the work site where that interaction can happen.
And Andrew, in your experience, I know I might be kind of doing a what if question for you, but in your experience, if you want to tell sort of how to do that, like, how do I do that? What's kind of happening in the world of construction for prime contractors? Like, are you finding people are putting them in their contract before they start? Are they giving them copies of procedures? Are they doing toolbox? Like, how do they get that information about our policies and procedures to the subcontractor? What's being out there? What's going on out there?
Well, there's no set way that you need to do that. And again, going back to the philosophy of due diligence is what's reasonable and what they need to know. You're certainly not hoping that they know, and you're providing them enough information at the level that they need. Again, too much information can be too much and unnecessary and not helpful. So taking a look at these things in a reasonable way and making it make sense. There's not a lot that the drywallers need to know about the excavation work, for example, just to look at the things that are polar, although there could be some interaction there. But that's really what we mean about taking a look at that. So when we talk about due diligence as a defense in how it started out, it's this concept of strict liability. And, criminal law needs to have mens rea, which is the criminal mind. So there's intent, etc. When it went into administrative law, it's strict liability. There was no defense in the beginning, and there needed to be a defense. Because people that do all these reasonable steps, things can still happen, right? So that's kind of how that started. So we got to get away from the point that if something happened, then there must be a failure somewhere, right? A failure in the person's actions. So I think for me that is developed into how we look at things and how we create that. What is your comfort level? What makes sense to you? When you've got an employer coming, what would they need to know? How many questions are you asking yourself? Really can't give you specifics on that. And this is really where I like health and safety and these concepts and taking a look at these principles rather than the regulations, because embracing the gray, and trust me, it's tough to get that those concepts for officers as well. Officers like the black and white, like the regulation here and there, but I find a great comfort in the gray of how do we take reasonable steps and make sure that these things work so that it sort of fits our operation, because there's a huge difference between constructing a tunnel than constructing a residential home or a tower, all those things. Got to have those thought patterns. You got to ask those questions. You got to lay it down. You got to have some scope to it, some insight. You need to talk to lots of people, and you need to figure that out.
I do like one thing that you said. I heard a safety person say this not too long ago to me as well, is that you do all of your reasonable stuff, you do your due diligence, but yet sometimes things can still happen, and that doesn't mean that there's a big failure in the system. And somebody said to me, there was an accident, a worker got injured, and they said, this program's, not working. And then they said, well, actually it did work, because we had all these things. It could have been this. And so our program works. So let's celebrate that our rescue plan worked. Let's celebrate that everything was in place the way that it was, and that it was in fact reasonable. And we did our diligence on it, and this worked. It's not a negative.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the defense of due diligence way back in history was introduced, because when they first went to strict liability, they recognized very quickly that it's unreasonable to say that Just because there was this, then this must have happened. So this concept of due diligence, that somebody's taking all reasonable precautions. And also we all always forget about the second part of that, is that the person believed in a set of facts that, truly believed in a set of facts that if those facts were true, it would have rendered whatever they did innocent. So it's not only a defense of you do everything that's reasonable, and we've discussed a lot about what reasonable is, and it can be different, but also in the fact that if you truly believe something different and you've been led astray, it's a defense for that as well. So in that, there's a good lesson there to make an effort to find out that what you're doing is actually true and factual. But yeah, I mean, how do you figure out what reasonable is? It's very easy in hindsight to say what you should have done. It's more difficult to say what you should do. But if you have a system, like when we talk about a risk-based approach, the first part of that is to identify all the hazards at your workplace. So you're brainstorming, you're writing them all down, and you're assessing the risk, and you're going to deal with those high risk stuff as a priority, and then you're going to get less and less down there. So if you're a roofer and you're working at heights, it's very reasonable that you have a robust program of training and supervising and education of workers working at heights. They should know how to put together fall protection plans, how to inspect their equipment, how to protect themselves. Very much so. So that's what reasonable deal with. Take a look at your operation. What are you dealing with the most? As a prime contractor, you got to look at all of those things. So when you're taking those steps of asking the employer what they're doing for compliance, you're also getting an insight into those hazards as well and how they're being controlled. So you build up an inventory of that. It's a tough job. The whole concept behind prime contractor is, hey, we got a mess of different people working on this work site, all with different tasks, different functions, coming with different attitudes and stresses on their life. And we got to make sure that we can figure out that everyone is doing what they need to do, and that everybody fits together and they're coordinated so that they're not harming other people. And what are the reasonable steps we need to do to ensure that? Very simple to say, very huge responsibility. And it takes all of your company involved in that in order to do it effective, right down to your workers, to your lead hands, to your supervisors, to your managers, superintendents, everybody that walks on that work site. Can't tell you how many times I've sat or been on a work site and talked to a superintendent and looked up on the roof, and there's roofers or framers there without fall protection. I pointed out to the superintendent, and the answer has just been, I've told them 2 or 3 times. That's not it. It really isn't it. Is your superintendent needs to deal with that and deal with that quickly, promptly, and effectively. And what you allow on your work site is what we see. Your superintendents and your supervisors, what they're allowing is the impression that we get, and we make evidence-based decisions, and we take a look at those things to a balance of probabilities, not to criminal law, which means that if it's more likely that you're doing this and you're doing that, then we're going to be writing corrective orders, and if we're not listened to, or if it's very serious, we're getting to different levels of motivation. So when you go down to your work sites and have a look at your superintendents and your lead hands, what are you asking them about what they're doing and how they deal with those violations? Because they happen, and maybe it's a simple conversation to, hey, when these roofers come here and they're doing this, what do you do?
Yeah, it's good. It's awesome. And I know we're coming up to 11 o'clock. There's like 4 minutes left. There's a couple more questions. I think, Andrew, were you able to stay a couple extra minutes just in case we don't get to all of them?
Sure.
You didn't? Okay, perfect. But I'm going to ask you one more, which I think, because I hear it a lot, and I think this is a great, I think you touched on it already, but again, just to reconfirm, when a person has a written agreement with an owner to be the prime contractor, can that prime contractor transfer their role and responsibilities to another person or another employer?
No.
I love that. That's a straight up answer. I totally do. Okay, well, let me ask you another yes or no question.
Wait a minute. They still have the responsibilities, but they can hire out that work, but they're still the ones responsible for it. And what I mean by that is you can be the prime contractor with these responsibilities and hire a consultant or hire some people to do that work, but you retain those responsibilities and they don't become the prime. You can't pass that over. That can only happen between a written agreement between the owner and the prime.
That's awesome. That's a good answer. And I know we talked a lot about that in the last webinar. So if you want to, whoever has that question, if you want to listen to that last webinar, we talked about that a lot. And 2 more minutes. And I don't know if you can answer this question, Andrew, but has WCB considered new businesses to submit a safety plan to obtain a WCB account, similar to a business plan for a WCB loan or business loan? So,
oh, you mean submit documentation in order to qualify to be an employer?
yeah, a safety plan.
I'm sure it's been considered, but it's not something that's been done. I mean, we look at the things like even in the owner, like if the owner doesn't enter into a written agreement with the prime contractor, they have the responsibilities of prime. But it's only if they engage somebody else that they need to make sure that that person's qualified. The owner can continue to do it on their merry way without being qualified at all. And that's just part of that kind of, I think, frontiersman mentality in British Columbia. Certainly, if you're the homeowner, you can pull a permit to do your own electrical work, which is mind-boggling. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way things are. So I think it may infringe on people's rights to have a business, and it would be seen as a barrier to start a business. But they certainly contemplate a lot what should be in these welcome packages and what information we should provide them for new businesses. And certainly places like the BCCSA, if you're starting a construction company, that would be my advice, and often the advice of the officers is go get connected and find out what you need to do, because people, I think the numbers are up around 48,000 employers in the construction sector. 95% of them are small or micro small, meaning less than 6 people. There's a lot of really, really good cabinet installers or framers or things that are excellent at what they do, but they don't know about health and safety beyond what they experienced in their own life. And it's a huge responsibility, like being a parent, and I go back to that again, you now have these very valuable people that you're responsible for, and again, reasonable people find out what they need to do and how they need to protect them.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. We just really appreciate you being here. And once again with us, thank you, thank you, thank you. For all of you that are watching and have joined us today, thank you for being here. Thank you for registering. Thank you for continuing to make our workplaces safe. This webinar will be posted on the BCCSA website probably early next week. So keep your eyes open for that, and keep your eyes open for the new date and new topic of our next webinar series, which will be, we'll email it out, we'll put it on the website. So be ready for that. Also, I know they put it in chat for you, but we will be sending you a survey. We really would like to know what you thought of the webinar, how we can help you in the future, what topics that you want us to do, because we are here for you. And as Andrew mentioned, the BC CSA has regional safety advisors that can certainly come on board with you, help you. If you're in the construction industry, we're here to serve you. We're here to mentor you. We're here to make safety simpler. So on that note, thank you again, Andrew. Virtual high five, fist bump for you. Everybody, on the behalf of the BCCSA and our guest, be safe and stay healthy. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.